very much for joining us on today's interviews with experts. As you know, I run a series of interviews, and these are specifically for my Academy members and to keep them informed about, well, what's affecting us really as we head towards that midlife point, and just all of the different areas that can be affecting us. So things like nutrition, our pelvic floor and exercises. So thank you very much for coming on today. Obviously, as a women's health coach, you have a wealth of knowledge around what exercises to do as we get older, specifically for women, and specifically for women who want to strengthen their core and pelvic floors. So I thought it would be really interesting for my Academy members to meet you, to understand a bit more about what you do, but also how you can help them, and also how they can help themselves. So we're going to go through some top tips at the end as to areas that they can focus on. So thank you very much for coming on today. Lovely to see you. It's probably worth kicking off just with who you are, what you do, who you work with, all that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, I'm Rebecca. As you said, I'm a women's health coach. I'm a stock-trained Pilates instructor. I'm a massage therapist, and I'm a holistic core restore coach. So there are about 90 coaches across the country, and I have a mentor called Jenny Burrell, and she has developed a series of programs which we run, and they've all been designed for women, by women, with women's health physiotherapists. So often women are treated like little men, but our bodies, our makeup, our physiology is so different to men. So it's really important that we do exercise that's specific to women, especially as we get older. And in terms of who I work with, I really help women, as you say, to rehab their core and pelvic floor. So I work with women who are postnatal, in the run-up to the menopause and beyond. So a whole range of women, but in particular at key life phases. And as I say, the starting point for me is always to help them strengthen their pelvic floor. And then once that is stronger, then we start to add on other exercise.
So actually, I mean, from what I know, you're not just working with people who are at 40, 45 sort of age group upwards, are you? You know, when we've been talking, you've said, you know, some women are in their 70s.
Yeah, absolutely.
And even earlier as well, so younger.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of ladies who have diastasis recti, so that's when you've had a baby and those muscles, those core muscles haven't quite come back together again, and that can cause pelvic floor dysfunction. So yeah, I work with anyone, mainly it's from about the age of 30 up to 50, but I also train the Women's Institute and do Pilates for those ladies too.
Brilliant, yeah. So, okay, so one of the areas obviously that you specialise in is the whole pelvic floor, and that was how we came to get in contact really, because I was keen to find someone who specialised in that area. As you know, clients that I've spoken to it's an area of concern for them. So do you want to talk like everyone through, you know, what happens when your pelvic floor is weak?
Yeah, of course. I mean, first of all, it's useful to define what your pelvic floor is, because I think a lot of people have no idea what their pelvic floor is. So I've got my pelvic floor model here. So basically the pelvic floor is like a sling. It attaches at the front at the pubis symphysis, at the back at the coccyx, and that's your last vertebrae of your spine. And then you have bony attachments at the hip. And as you can see, you've got these muscles ring round the main 3 orifices. So obviously, if you're told to just draw up as if you're stopping a wee, you're not going to be working the whole of the pelvic floor. And it performs some really useful functions. It's the base of your core, it's the base of your pelvis, and it holds in your womb, your bladder, and your bowel. So it's a superstar of a muscle because it is big, and I don't think people realise quite how big the pelvic floor is. And I think actually a lot of women know more about their mobile phones than they do about their pelvic floor. We're just not taught. Really, women should be taught as teenagers about this muscle because it's so important. When that muscle is weak, that's when you can start to encounter problems like backache, like urinary incontinence, and things like prolapse, when the pelvic floor organs start to push against the walls of the vagina, and then you notice a kind of bulge within the vagina. So you can, and that's when you would want to obviously seek help from a women's health physiotherapist. And there's so much you can do. And I think that's the thing, these issues are really, really common. But they, even though they're common, they don't have to be normal. You don't have to put up with them. 1 in 3 women suffer from urinary incontinence, 1 in 10 with fecal incontinence. And the biggest reason that elderly women break a hip is rushing to the loo. So it is really important to get that muscle strong. But actually you could have a too strong pelvic floor. So if you've got your pelvic floor switched on all the time, that's actually a weak muscle too, and that can lead to prolapse as well. So there's a lot of nuances. There's a fine balance. And then the other issue with prolapse surgery can often have to be repeated. So if you have a surgery when you're quite young, in your 30s and your 40s, it's often it has to be repeated. So I'd always say, take a conservative approach to these things and work with, a women's health coach or a women's health physiotherapist to get your pelvic floor strong. And even if it is strong now, you want to maintain that strength. So
yeah, because probably the first time that you ever hear about pelvic floor, or that even mentioned, is when you're pregnant, and once you've had a child, and they talk about, make sure you do your pelvic floor exercises. But at that time, you're so busy, breastfeeding, looking after a little one. That's kind of the last thing on your mind, isn't it?
And they're the kind of, often you are told just to draw up as if you're stopping a wee. And that isn't really functional. The way we teach is to bring that traditional Kegel into functional exercise and into good posture and into good breathing as well. But you're absolutely right. The first time most women hear about the pelvic floor is when they're pregnant. And that's one of the main things that can weaken the pelvic floor. Pregnancy, even if you've had a C-section, you're still holding that baby on your pelvic floor for 9 months. The pushing phase of pregnancy, high impact sports, if you're not doing your pelvic floor exercises, heavy lifting, obesity, constipation is really, really weakens the pelvic floor. And for a lot of midlife ladies, really a non-negotiable is to make sure you have good bowel health. And obviously you mentioned you were talking to a nutritionist, and I'm sure she was stressing that the importance of fiber, the importance of keeping hydrated, because constipation can really, really affect the pelvic floor too.
Yeah, she was talking at it more from getting rid of old hormones out of the system.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, and the importance, of that process. But it's interesting that the whole pelvic floor bits comes in as well.
Oh, absolutely.
So if you were having a problem with your pelvic floor, you were talking about that it could affect your back as well. Does that tend to be the lower back, or?
Because the pelvic floor is basically it's the base of your core, and your core is made up of a number of muscle groups. The first one is your breathing diaphragm, and that works synergistically together with your pelvic floor. So when you inhale, your pelvic floor naturally relaxes. When you exhale, it contracts. And it also works with multifidus, which are muscles that attach to the vertebrae at the back, and then the transverse abdominis, which are your deepest abdominal muscles. And they wrap around like a corset. So they attach at your back, and then they come round at the front. So it's like a corset of muscles. So if you have any weakness, so I mentioned diastasis earlier, where those muscles they come apart anyway when you're pregnant, but for some people they don't reconnect. So if you have diastasis, that can, weaken the whole of the core and put more pressure on the pelvic floor. The glutes are also part of the kind of wider part of the core, because if your glutes are weak, and many of my clients, when I start working with them, have weak glutes,
I've definitely got that.
The pressure will always, your lower back will always take up the slack, as will the pelvic floor. So I do a lot of work with my clients to make sure they've got really strong glutes, and they look good as well. But it's and I think that's the really interesting thing, working with women in their 70s. I can see the issues that they face and reverse engineer them. Because a lot of the ladies do have weak glutes. They don't have much upper body strength. And I don't know about you, but when I'm in my 70s, I want to be continent, and I want to be able to get out of a chair without having to use my arms.
Yes, yeah. I think that's kind of what dawns on you when you hit 40 and head towards getting older, that how important those glute muscles are, and your core muscles, and just the flexibility in general as well, just to be mobile, and like you say, not have to rely on pushing yourself out of a chair, or somebody helping you out of a chair, when you're in your 70s.
Absolutely. And I think there's just so many nuances to teaching women in their 40s, that why you need to work with someone who is specifically trained in this area. It isn't just go hard at the gym anymore. The exercises that suit us in our 20s really don't suit us in our 40s and beyond. But it is never too late to strengthen your pelvic floor.
Okay.
And as I say, I work with ladies in their 70s who have really got a much more stronger pelvic floor. And it is important because, as I say, always say, it's your independence.
Yes, yeah. So how would you go about strengthening it? Your pelvic floor, your core. What's a good way?
Well, I think it's worth talking about the other things that have an effect on the pelvic floor. So menopause has a big effect on the pelvic floor, and I think if you haven't worked on issues after having a child, those issues can really manifest when you come into menopause. And that's key, because every year, post 30s, every year we lose 2% of muscle tone in our pelvic floor. Wow. So that's really why we need to be working on our pelvic floor health. And perimenopause, which is the lead up to the menopause, can start from the age of 35, and it can last anywhere from 4 to 15 years. So it can be the longest hormonal transition for a woman. And I think that's kind of mind-blowing, because it started to be talked about, menopause, perimenopause, but there's a lot of myths around it still, and it's still quite a taboo subject. So, but it's important to know what's going on, and it's the sex hormones are fluctuating. So that's estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, and they don't just nosedive off; they go up and down, up and down, up and down, and that's what leads to the symptoms that we attribute with menopause. And menopause is actually just a kind of moment in time, because it's 1 year. The average age for menopause is 51, and it's kind of defined as 1 year post having your last period.
Okay.
And then you're postmenopausal, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
But the doctors will diagnose it dependent on your symptoms. And I think that's where some of the problems come in, because there are so many symptoms. There's 35 different symptoms of perimenopause, and they can range. I mean, the most common are kind of mood swings, so low mood, rage, anxiety, which I think would be familiar for a lot of people, hot sweats, interrupted sleep, infrequent or kind of gushing periods, and then vaginal atrophy. So some people can get real pain and dryness in their vagina as well. So it's worth really being aware of the many symptoms that you can get with menopause. And that's really key, because you need to, when we're discussing exercise, you need to think about your pelvic floor. That needs to be pelvic floor safe.
Yeah. And presumably that whole transition up to the menopause, I mean, that can be,
that's
what,
the
10 years or?
Yeah, so the perimenopause is the lead up. So that's the 4 to 15 year lead up to the menopause. The menopause is 1 second, then you're postmenopausal. And you still may have symptoms because your hormones may still be fluctuating, or I'm sure they will be fluctuating.
And I think that's what a lot of people don't actually realise, that it can be that 10 to 15 years beforehand. So if most people, hit menopause at 51, then actually you could be starting it as early as 35, that sort of age, which feels actually really early, doesn't it? To be experiencing those sorts of symptoms. And
it's such a busy time of life for women. If you think about what you're dealing with, children, elderly parents, work, and then relationships too. And I think that's another reason, just being aware, because the menopause can affect every single area of your life. So the more we talk about it, the more we talk to friends about it, how they're feeling, share information, the better.
I mean, when I first started noticing things, I would say I was 40, around that sort of age. But when you do look back on it, you think, well, actually, maybe, it had started earlier, but you never even really, thought that it was possible, to start that early. So it is really interesting. It was definitely one of the reasons why, I wanted to, for somebody like yourself to come on.
There's so much you can do. So in terms of nutrition, I'm sure your nutritionist covered it. And in terms of lifestyle, to really help with the symptoms of menopause and perimenopause.
So is there specific exercises that you would suggest that someone does?
Well, I think
every day, or?
Well, I think the first thing as well is you need to be aware of what are the major health risks that affect women. Because again, women are not little men. The second biggest killer of women is cardiovascular disease. The first one is now dementia, and we suffer more with osteoporosis than men. And bone density reduces quite dramatically in the 2 years post-menopause. So in terms of cardiovascular disease, you need to be doing exercise that gets your heart rate up. But at the same time, I'm not saying go and sign up for a marathon or do CrossFit, because you need to protect your joint health and also your tendons too. And estrogen tendons love estrogen. So that's another thing you've got to be thinking about. And then, as I mentioned before, our muscles, we all suffer with muscle atrophy, so weakening muscles, as men and women both. So we need to be doing strength exercises. So that could be body weight. I would always say, resistance bands, lifting dumbbells, those kind of things. But all the time, you need to protect your pelvic floor. You need impact because of your bone health. But again, for some people, running is going to be too much pressure on their pelvic floor. Walking is good, but I would always sort of say, do stomping over swimming, stomp your feet, because you need that impact. And a lot of people think, oh, osteoporosis, that's for old people. but our bone density starts. I think we reach peak bone mass. I've written it down somewhere at the age of 35. And so after that, it tails off. So it's not old lady business. I can't tell you the number of people I've bumped into in their ladies in their 50s who have fractured toes, ankles, knees, and they've got osteoporosis, and nobody's warned them about what they should be doing. I'm sure your nutritionist covered it, but it's the importance of having calcium, vitamin D, and doing your impact exercise, but also body strength exercise helps too, because bone is living tissue. So once you start lifting weights, it helps to lay down new bone too. But then the other side of this is dementia. So dual activity really helps in terms of exercise, but also sleep is really important, as is lifestyle and reducing down the stress. And I think at this time of our lives, we've really got to reduce down the cortisol, which is a stress hormone that's released when we get very, very anxious, and it lays down as fat on your belly. So and belly fat matters because of the risk of cardiovascular disease. So that's when you want to be thinking about kind of bringing in the meditation, sort of yoga, in terms of really trying to relax your body, relax your mind, and seeing what you can get off your plate. So many of my clients think they have to do it all, but amazingly, there are other people who you can offload stuff to as well. So in terms of what we need cardiovascular exercise that doesn't, stress us, doesn't release too much cortisol, and doesn't do too much damage to our joints, because I'm sure most of us here want to be living in our bodies for another 40 to 50 years. And we haven't lived so long postmenopausal as we are now. I think in Victorian times, most women would reach menopause at 50 and then die at the age of 51. So we're living very, very long periods of time. And then exercise is great because it releases endorphins, it builds that muscle mass, which we really, really want. And also lifting weights promotes bone density, but it also promotes testosterone, which is important because we start to lose that hormone. So the research shows that what we want to be doing is exercising for 10 to 20 minutes, getting our heart rates up. So you want to be increasing the intensity, but for shorter bursts of time. You don't need to be doing those long kind of hour-long workouts where the cortisol levels are probably going through the roof. You want to raise your body temperature. You want to get out of breath. So you want to be a little bit breathless. So big movements are good, whole body movements, functional movements, your squats, your lunges, your deadlifts, and then bringing in resistance. So using resistance bands, using dumbbells, and these are things that I teach in my course. And
so how often should you, if we were thinking about a typical week, how often should you be doing those sorts of like weight bearing or your own?
I'd say about 3 times a week, but also making sure that you're active every day. So walking, getting out in nature is so important for people. And then the way that I teach my pelvic floor exercises, it's pelvic floor time, just sit and draw up your pelvic floor. The pelvic floor has to be intrinsic to everything. So we teach something called the NAC, which physiotherapists teach. So when you get up from sitting to standing, you do it on an exhale breath, and that contracts the pelvic floor. If you do it on an inhale, which a lot of people breath hold all the time, your pelvic floor is open, you're putting 10 pounds of pressure through your pelvic floor. And it's actually those day-to-day things that can affect the body more than seeing somebody once a week. So we're just bringing pelvic floor exercises into functional movement. So the way we teach is to get people happy with drawing up their pelvic floor and working with the whole body, because we work with the fascia system as well. And most people have probably heard of plantar fasciitis on the bottom of your
Yes.
feet. But you're covered nose to toes in fascia, and the fascia connects into the pelvic floor as well. So we use our feet, we use our hands, and then we start to bring in equipment, because that makes that connection to the pelvic floor deeper. Working with our breath makes the connection to the pelvic floor deeper as well.
So is there a way that you would know, if you were doing those strength exercises, that you would know that you're definitely doing or affecting the pelvic floor? I mean, is it just that you do it so much every week and then you will see a difference, or when you're actually doing the exercise, can you really see?
I mean, you can feel it. Most of the women I work with come to me because they've got urinary incontinence, mild prolapse, or they just want to have a stronger pelvic floor, and they report that they can feel it's getting stronger. But when the way we teach, people can feel the connection to the pelvic floor. So, you know, we actually we cue everything, all the elements of how you stand, your posture, how you breathe, because there's so much more to it than just your kind of Kegel. We probably should have done an exercise demo on it.
Yes,
we'll do that another time. And then you can feel that connection to the pelvic floor, and then you bring it into all your exercise, into your movements. And I have ladies saying to me, what you want is for that to become a kind of subconscious movement, rather than thinking I've got to draw up my pelvic floor. So when you're drawing up weights, you lift up your pelvic floor, rather than not even thinking about your pelvic floor. When you use weights, you're thinking about your breathing strategies, you're thinking about how you're working with your fascia system. So it's not just a kind of, let's do some weights and not even think about it. It's really working with your body, understanding the sort of physiology of your body and how it works.
Because I've done that before, where I'm just like going like that, this really doesn't feel like it's doing anything at all.
And that's when you'll get injured. So that's why the starting point for me is always make sure your core and pelvic floor is strong. And then when that corset of muscles is on, that will protect your spine. You know, it gives you a lot more strength when it comes to lifting. And ideally what you want to be doing as you get older is lifting weights.
So if you're doing that weight bearing, about 3 times a week, then you need to be doing the cardio, ideally, 3 times a week as well?
That's kind of like cardio as well. I mean, when I lift weights, you do get sweaty as well. I have a range of different courses. So I always start with my foundation course, which is called Every Woman, and that's the course that starts to strengthen your pelvic floor and then integrates those into those functional movements, squats, lunges. And then
you're actually demonstrating squats and lunges and how to do them correctly.
And how to draw up your pelvic floor. So because and then bringing in different ranges of movement, because you need to not just work in the forward sort of, it's called the sagittal plane, but you also you need to work in the transverse plane, which is when you're moving from side to side. I demonstrate that, and once people are stronger, then they go on to my next course, which is called Heat, which is when we start to do more, it's high intensity, low impact. So we start to lift weights, we start to really raise our body temperature and burn calories, because for a lot of midlife ladies, they might find that they have put on a bit of weight, and I help them tackle that too.
So if they're doing the weight bearing, and then that's obviously raising heart rate. But if they wanted to do some other form of exercise, would it be better to do things like the swimming and walking?
I think the key is do what brings you joy. That is what the habit you'll keep to. Really try and find an exercise that you love. So yes, I mean, walking is brilliant, because it's low impact, it's out in nature, you can do it with friends, family. But honestly, do what you enjoy. So if it's Zumba, if it's dancing, yeah, if it's swimming, that's great for cardiovascular health.
Yes.
I think the thing is, it's getting a balance. You don't just want to be doing one thing. If you were swimming 7 days a week, you're not going to get your bone impact. If you're doing just Pilates, you're not really going to be building up your muscle tone, but that's brilliant for flexibility, which is really, really key. So I think changing up your exercise too is important.
Yes, yeah. I know for me personally, I would really struggle to do the running.
Yeah,
I find that impact, too much. But yeah, the walking I absolutely love.
yeah, and you have to really watch your joint health as well, because it takes us longer to recover from injury as well. So
yes,
that's key. That's really, really important. But equally, I have people who run because it's good for their mental health.
Yes.
So there's just so many nuances here. So you do have to do what you enjoy.
I mean, runners seem to, when they get into it, they seem to absolutely love it. I mean, there's obviously some sort of buzz that runners get.
I mean, I used to run, and that's what brought me into where I am today, because I was training for a half marathon, fractured my hip, and I was only 28, and I found out that I went to see lots of different 4 different physiotherapists. I was told to go away, drink red wine, take paracetamol. In the end, they said go and get an MRI scan, and it showed up I'd fractured my hip.
Wow.
And going back, it was because I've got celiac disease, so I hadn't absorbed my nutrients properly. My body hadn't absorbed calcium. So I had osteopenia, which is a precursor to osteoporosis. So very fortunate I found out, actually, because a lot of people don't find out that the cause for me was celiac disease, and it's a really hard disease to diagnose. So I was very, very fortunate. But this is why I always say for women, you just have to advocate for your own health. No one's going to tell you what to do. But this is a key sort of life stage that we're in at the moment, and it's a great transition, because I think for a lot of us, hopefully it is a time when we can put ourselves first, and we've got a bit more time for ourselves. Maybe our kids are a little bit older. So yeah, do take the time to find the exercise and the classes that you do enjoy and that bring you happiness.
Yes, yeah. I mean, the whole lockdown thing, has obviously been so difficult for so many people in terms of exercise and not being able to get to the gym or go swimming or whatever it might be. So September feels like the right sort of time to kickstart everything again and to get into that routine.
I think just trying to make it a habit, an enjoyable habit.
Yeah.
And just start small. For example, start with 5 minutes a day and see how you get on, rather than thinking I've got to go off to the gym and do an hour's workout. Do something that you feel is sustainable.
I mean, I've been watching your little videos on Instagram, and they're great because they're really short, but actually, really helpful in terms of,
thank you.
What to do and how to do them. And just, I don't think you really, until you start delving into it, you don't really realize how important the weight bearing, exercise is. I suppose it's just historic, isn't it, that we've been taught it's important to get your heart rate up and to do that exercise that is, almost quite high impact. And to do that 3 times a week, because it's very much focused on losing weight, but actually there is a much bigger picture, isn't there?
Absolutely. I sort of grew up in the kind of, the culture, the diet culture. And my parents were always on diets. And rather than the emphasis being on your health and your well-being, your mental health and how you feel. And absolutely you shouldn't be all about counting calories. It should be how we feel.
And I think that's been the biggest shift for me, you know, when I've been following people like you and working with a nutritionist, you do start to listen to your body more and actually what's right for you, like you say, rather than what you're being told by the media or you know, historic stuff. Yeah,
and I think so often we don't listen to our bodies. You know, we just have been told to go hard, go fast at the gym, and that's when you will get injuries. You will, you know, injure your joints, and they can be really hard to come back from those sorts of injuries.
Yeah, and it does take time. I mean, I think if I do hurt my back, and sometimes I'm like, what did I actually do to end up with you know, something wrong with my shoulder or my lower back or whatever it might be, and I can't actually place a time when it
and that's probably a historic weakness. It might be a weakness in your core, that your back will always take the strain.
Yes, yeah.
So you know, and in terms of core exercises, I would say not to do is the kind of traditional planks, sit-ups, because they can really put too much pressure through your pelvic floor and really you could injure your lower back. So they're the ones I'd say I would avoid.
Be careful with.
Kind of hundreds in Pilates, those sorts of things. Or if you're doing them, just make sure that your instructor can modify them for you, and don't do things that, you know, are causing you pain.
Yeah, I mean, when I saw a physio a few years ago now, he said that I was definitely using my back muscles rather than my glute muscles. So I know, I mean, it's a standing joke at the Pilates class that I go to that I need to work on my glute muscles and get those stronger. But it's amazing how many people have, you know, problems with their backs.
And a lot of it is down to glutes, and they're you know, the biggest muscle in your body, but they're very difficult to activate. So we give women specific exercises to activate their glutes, which is again another reason I love doing what I'm doing, because everything we do is based on women's bodies.
Yes, Okay, so if there were, I don't know, say the top 3 tips that you would say to women, what would they be?
Oh, I've got lots of tips. I think the main one has got to be, you've got to advocate for your own health. You know, what would you say to your friend? Because so often we put ourselves to the bottom of the list. And that goes for everything. So in terms of, you know, your menopausal journey, make sure if you're not happy with the advice you're getting from your GP, ask for a referral, see somebody else. Every woman should wear pants, not pads, even though things like urinary incontinence are incredibly common. It doesn't have to be normal. I mean, if you're wearing tenor lady in your 40s, 50s, it's not going to get better by the time you're in your 70s. And that's when you really need to be independent. If you're worried about any kind of pelvic floor dysfunction, go and seek help. So you can get a referral without seeing your GP by the NHS, or you could see a women's health physiotherapist privately, and it's really well worth it. I'd say treat it like an MOT, you know, go and see one once a year, because of the effects of things like menopause. You can, you know, changes can happen over time, and, you know, motion is lotion, keep moving. And that's going to help with things in terms of joints. That's the best way to warm up your joints. And I think, finally, I'd just say, you know, do things that you love, do things that you enjoy when it comes to your exercise, because then you'll stick to it. If you're doing something you hate, you know, chances are you might last a couple of weeks. But if you really enjoy it, you will keep doing that, and that will become part of your lifestyle.
Cool. So if people want to work with you or to find out more information about what you do, where should they go? I
think the best thing would be to go to my website, because I offer a number of different courses or working with me one-to-one, and it is Core Connection UK, all one word.com.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah, and I'd also add, you know, think about checking you out on Instagram if they're on Instagram as well, because there's lots of little videos on there
Oh, thank
just
you.
give a flavour of, you know, the sorts of things that you do, and you know, the exercises that you recommend. So, and you're very good at posting consistently, unlike me. But yeah, I think they're really interesting to watch, and we'll just give them a flavour, wouldn't they? Of
Yeah, definitely. And there's some
sorts of-
exercises that I include in my Every Woman courses to get your core stronger. So, you know, they're not your typical plank
No.
sit-up exercises. And so you might be interested in looking at those.
Yes, yeah, brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Rebecca. That's been really
Thanks,
helpful.
Jane.
And yeah, I'm sure a lot of people, you know, will find it really interesting. I think, you know, if it is back pain or lower back pain, or, you know, poor glutes, or, you know, having a hysterectomy, you know, at an early age. There's so many things, aren't there? So many events that can actually affect your core and your pelvic floor. So
yeah, I think always just seek help. You know, you don't have to do this on your own, and you don't have to be in pain.
Yes, yeah. Well, it's knowing where to go, isn't it? And who to say, especially at the moment, you know, when the doctors are so busy. It's
yeah, I mean, for your membership, if anyone wants to drop me a line, I'm always happy to signpost to the people I work with.
Okay.
And on my website, I actually have the women's health physiotherapist I work with. Her details are on there.
Brilliant, lovely. Well, thank you very much. And yeah, I'm sure my members will be really pleased to see this video. Thank you.
Thank you.